Hey everyone, we are going to go ahead and get into section 6.3 talking about properties of parallelograms. Remember, a parallelogram is just a special type of quadrilateral, meaning that the opposite sides are parallel. Okay, so remember when it comes to the notes, even if I go through them a little quickly through the video, you can always hit pause so that you can write them down, and you can always rewatch this multiple times to kind of help you a little more. So, the first property of a parallelogram. Remember, a parallelogram, these opposite sides are parallel to one another. So the first property is that if you have a parallelogram, the opposite sides are also going to be congruent. So they are the same measure. So if we look at this first example, we know that QP and RS are congruent, and we know that QR and PS are congruent. It doesn't matter which two you set equal, whether it's these two or if it's these two, as long as they are opposite sides. The nice thing is that all of these have an x, so you can kind of choose which pair you want to work with. So let's do 7x minus 3 equals 2x plus 12. Okay, I'm going to subtract my 2x over on both sides. And I'm going to end up adding that 3 on both sides. So I get 5x equals 15. Divide by 5 on both sides, and I get that x is 3. Okay, remember, just like normal, we can always, especially when it comes to things being congruent, always check our answers by plugging it back in. So if we do 7, so for QR, which really, that's our next question, QR, if we do 7 times 3, which is 21, minus 3, gives us 18. We want PS to be the same thing. All right, so 2 times 3 gives us 6, plus 12, we do get 18. So those two are congruent, which is what we wanted. We're going to do the same thing with QP. Or on here, we named it PQ. So we have 4 times 3, which is 12. Which means that we also want RS to be the same thing. So 5 times 3 is 15, minus 3 does give you 12. So those are also congruent, which is exactly what we wanted. Okay, so in a parallelogram, the opposite sides are congruent. The next thing that we have is that consecutive angles of a parallelogram are supplementary. Remember, consecutive means in a row. So A and B are right next to each other. They're consecutive. They're in a row. B and C, consecutive, in a row. C and D, and then D and A. Each of these pairs are going to add up to equal 180 degrees. Okay, so any of them that are right next to each other are going to be 180 degrees in a parallelogram. Going along with that, the opposite angles. So opposite angles here are going to be congruent. So angles A and C are congruent, and angles B and D are going to be congruent in this particular image. So let's use some of this information. If we have that GHJK is a parallelogram, we want to find the value of, well, I put X there, but it's actually going to be A. So let me fix that real quick. The value of A, there we go. All right, so these two, notice that these two are right next to each other, meaning that they are consecutive. Okay, so that means that they will add up together to equal 180 degrees. Oh, it's moving on me. There we go. 180 degrees. Gotta love technology. All right, first thing, combine our like terms. So we get 9A. And if we look, our 5s actually cancel out, so we have 9A equals 180. Divide both sides by 9, and we get that A equals 20. Now, of course, we should check. So we plug this back in. A plus 5, so 20 plus 5 is 25. 8 times 20. Okay, 8 times 20 is 160, minus 5 would give us 155. And if we add those two together, we do get 180 degrees, which is what we want. So we can always check to make sure that we did it correctly. So now the second part wants us to find each of the angle measures. Well, from checking our first answer, we already found that the measure of angle G is 155 degrees. And then the measure of angle H is 25 degrees. Now, if we remember, the third property that we had told us that opposite angles are congruent. So if I go up here and I look, opposite of G is angle J. So the measure of angle J is also going to be 155 degrees because it's congruent to that angle G. And then the measure of angle K, since K is opposite of H, they will be congruent. So that is 25 degrees. All right, let's move on. The diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. Okay, bisect, remember that means to cut in half. Okay, so that means that these diagonals cut each other in half, making these two congruent and these two pieces congruent. So, in this first example here, it says, what is SK? We know that SU right here is 35. So SK right here is going to be half of that. So SK is half of 35. So SK is going to equal 17.5. The next one asks for KT, it tells us KT right here is 19. It asks for RT, so it wants this whole piece. So if KT is 19, RT is going to be twice that length. So twice as much as 19, RT is going to be 38. All right, so far, so good. Hopefully this is pretty basic for you so far. We're going to go into our last page, and it looks like this is our last example. All right, so given parallelogram GHJK, if PK is 4, so if this is 4, and HK, so this whole piece is 2/3 of GJ, what is GP? All right, this is a lot. First, remember that if we have PK right here, let me redraw this over here. I have HPK. PK is 4. Now, remember, the diagonals bisect each other. So if PK is 4, that tells us that HK is actually going to be 8. So, if I'm looking over here at this other diagonal, if I have GPJ, it tells us that HK, right here it says HK is 2/3 of GJ. Well, we just found that HK was 8. So if I plug that in, if I say 8 is equal to 2/3 of GJ, in order to get rid of this 2/3, I multiply both sides by the reciprocal. So I multiply both sides by 3/2. 8 times 3 is 24. Divided by 2, you get 12. So GJ is actually 12. This whole piece right here is 12. It wants to know, how big is GP? So I just want to find this little piece. If I know that the whole diagonal right there is 12, then that tells us that half of that would be GP, which is 6. GP is 6. I know at first it looked like it was going to be super confusing going from one diagonal to another, but just break it down one piece at a time, and it's really not as bad as it looks. You guys do have a Pearson assignment to go with this. If you have any questions, email me or message me through Remind, and good luck.